Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making it in through the snow today. Welcome to the 11th meeting of the Audit Committee. We have quorum present, and therefore I call this meeting to order. May I ask, are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none, I will now take a motion to confirm the minutes from October 27, 2017. Councillor Ford. All those in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. We'll now go through the items. And I will note that on item AU 11.1, the 2017 annual report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office, we have a presentation and we have a speaker. AU 11.2, 2017 annual report on the fraud and waste hotline, we have a presentation and a speaker. AU 11.3, IT Infrastructure and IT Asset Management Review Phase 1, Establishing an Information Technology Roadmap to Guide the Way Forward for Infrastructure and Asset Management. Anyone wishing to hold that item?
Yes, I'll hold it, Chair.
Thank you. AU 11.4, Auditor General's 2018 Status Report on Outstanding Audit Recommendations for Divisions in Cluster A and the City Manager's Office. Before I suggest any holds on that, I would ask that the member of council identify the particular subcomponent of the report so that the staff that need to respond to that can self-identify and make themselves available when the item comes up. Are there any holds on that item? Seeing none, may I have a motion on that item?
I'll move adoption.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. And that is that City Council receive this report for information and that City Council not authorize the public release of the confidential information contained in confidential attachment number 1. All those in favour? Any opposed? That is carried. AU 11.5, Award of Request for Proposal 9171-17-7291 to Welch LLP for external audit services for city arenas, community centres, and miscellaneous entities. Anyone wishing to hold that item? May I have a motion to adopt that item? Councillor Ford's hand got up first. All those in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. In AU 11.6, Compliance Audit of Waterfront Toronto Contribution Agreements. Are there any members wishing to hold that item? May I have a motion that Audit Committee receive this report for information? Councillor Matlow. All of those in favour? Any opposed? That is carried. All right, so we will go to AU 11.1, the 2017 annual report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office. We do have a speaker registered, that is Derek Moran. Good morning, Derek, and you have 5 minutes.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. So it mentions in this item, Auditor General's report, Auditor General's message. Our office is proud of the work we do to ensure Torontonians' tax dollars are well spent and that city programs are effectively run. Our office is proud of the work we do to ensure Torontonians' tax dollars are well spent. I like the sounds of that. You know what I also like the sounds of? And I want the Auditor General and our staff to take notice of this. This is Toronto Municipal Code, Chapter 3, Accountability Officers, Section 3-14, Powers, Duties, and Limitations under Part 5. When carrying out his or her duties under Part 5 of the Act, the Auditor General has the general powers and duties and is subject to the limitations set out in Sections 178 to 182 of the Act. Section 3-15, Responsibilities. A, the Auditor General is responsible for carrying out financial, in brackets it says excluding attest, compliance and performance audits of all programs, activities, and functions of all city departments, the offices of the mayor, and members of council, local boards, restricted definition, and city-controlled corporations. B, despite subsection A, the Auditor General may undertake financial, excluding a test, compliance and performance audits and provide recommendations to the board upon request by the following boards. 1, Toronto Police Services Board. 2, Toronto Public Library Board. 3, Toronto Board of Health. C, the Auditor General shall only undertake an audit of the Toronto Hydro Corporation and its subsidiaries upon specific direction from council in relation to 1, a perceived breach by Toronto Hydro Corporation of the shareholder direction, or 2, a specific purpose or project where the Auditor General has not been able to obtain the necessary information, either A, through the shareholder direction reporting mechanisms, or B, through inquiries to senior management of the Toronto Hydro Corporation, or C, through a request from council to the chair of the Toronto Hydro Corporation. D, all reports by the Auditor General on city-controlled agencies and city corporations shall be submitted first to the agency or corporation's board of directors. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't hear her name, the Auditor General, come up at City Council during the tug of war between Councillor Perks and the mayor's designate, by the way, on the Toronto Hydro Board, Councillor Holiday here, while this was being debated. So I have a deputation to make. Remember, a deputation is appointing people to represent others. I appoint the Auditor General Beverly Romeo Beeler to act as the trustee for me in this matter, and that I direct her, respectfully of course, to get the answers to all of the questions that Councillor Gord Perks has asked for from Toronto Hydro. Like, we just can't have people running for public office telling the rest of us whatever we want to hear just to ensure they get into public office by getting the most votes, so they can just turn around once they are in office and do whatever they want, and the opposite of what they campaigned on. You know, because remember, Karen Stentz, wherever you are, she did come out in a very hasty manner and said you were going to sell that off, which I would not do. Remember, Mayor Tory said this, everybody. I would not sell Toronto Hydro. So take notice of what it says in the criminal code regarding fraudulent concealment. Section 341, everyone who, for a fraudulent purpose, takes, obtains, removes, or conceals anything is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years. And I'm just thinking maybe Councillor Matlow here, because I know he's thinking about running for mayor. Maybe Councillor Matlow can suggest again out loud about getting the police involved if Toronto Hydro doesn't hand over the information to the Auditor General that both Councillor Perks and David Ryder of the Toronto Star are seeking from them, just as he was good enough to say, I think he was the only councillor that said, should we go to the Toronto Police regarding the Toronto Parking Authority? And I just want to acknowledge and commend Councillor Matlow for doing that. So maybe we should think about doing that again if we don't get this information that the public deserves to know, because we're not paying for lawyers to conceal information from us, are we?
Thank you for speaking to us.
So while my team gets set up with to do a presentation, I just want to provide an overview. It's really important to recognize that even though I come forth with my reports, I'm supported by a broad team, and also the city implements the recommendations and they're supportive during the audit. So in helping to grow my team as people start to retire over the next few years, and I have 4 years left in my term, what I like to do is first of all recognize my team by allowing them to present to the committee for demonstrating the value of the office, because they are a big part of it. And it also provides them the opportunity to grow, and this is part of my succession planning and the development of staff, and I can say that they step up to the plate each and every time. So I'd just like to turn it over to, I'm just going to introduce a few slides and then I'll turn it over to the team. In relation to the work that we do, we really are the people who provide an independent lens to City Council, and it's City Council who holds staff to account and makes recommendations for improvement. So we have a role, and the role is an important role. Our mandate is to make sure that the funds are used appropriately, and then to also, when projects are approved, to look for value for money, to make sure the intention of council, once council has decided something, that intention is implemented. We come here not to toot our own horn in demonstrating the value, but by law, our office has to prepare a report that outlines the work that we have done and the value that's come from that. And so that's why we're here. I'll turn it over to my team.
Thank you, Auditor General. So this slide shows the major activity and accomplishments from our office in 2017. In 2017, we issued 13 performance audit reports and 5 investigative reports, providing a total of 163 recommendations to city agencies and divisions. Our fraud and waste hotline processed 680 complaints with over 1,000 allegations. Our follow-up team, they reviewed the implementation status of 152 recommendations from our period report. We also conducted IT audits of our city network security and infrastructure. We coordinate and oversee external financial audits as well. So we don't select our audit just based on cost-saving opportunity. I want to clarify that. In fact, we select our audits based on risk and other factors. The objective of many of our audits are to ensure adequate controls are in place and the program is operating effectively and efficiently. So cost saving are often a byproduct of our audits when we are assessing the program's effectiveness and efficiencies. As a result, there are different types of benefits from our audit. Some are quantifiable in dollar value, such as reducing operating costs or helping a better use of government public funds. Some other benefits are not quantifiable in dollar value, such as more effective implementations of legislative requirements or internal controls and securities. So our saving estimates in the annual reports are conservative. So, for example, even when we identify annual recurring saving, we only project the saving for 5-year period, even though in most instances, the annual recurring saving will go beyond the 5-year period. And we do not include potential saving in our calculation of return on investment. We wait until our recommendations have been fully implemented or substantially implemented by staff. At that point, we go in and we assess, we can more confidently assess the amount of saving, and that's the realized saving we include in our calculations. We discuss the saving estimates with management staff and confirm they are accurate and reasonable before we put it in our calculations. If there's any additional cost from implementing our recommendations, such as system development costs, or they need to hire extra staff to implement our recommendation, we deduct that implementation cost from our saving calculations. So this next slide illustrates the realized one-time and projected 5-year savings achieved on a year-by-year basis, as you can see, and it's between the last 5 years, 2013 and 2017. Since 2013, management's implementation of our recommendations resulted in one-time and projected 5-year savings totaling $203 million. So on behalf of the Auditor General and our office, we want to acknowledge and thank you, city staff and agency staff, for implementing our recommendations. It is often not easy for staff who have been running the program for many years to to be receptive to ideas and suggestions from somebody outside of their program, and we appreciate their efforts. And some of our recommendations require process or system change that really requires significant amount of time and work from staff to implement our recommendations. So this looks nice to make sure we are comparing apple to apple. So our return on investment is based on the 5-year cost of operating our office, which is about $23.9 million. And then we compare to the 5-year saving, which is $203 million. So this means for every dollar invested in our office, there was a return of $8.5. And our last year return on investment was $7.4. So the Auditor General wanted me to make sure I state that this number will fluctuate year over year, so we make no promise for next year's return. So at this point, I'm going to ask Nero, who's the one, the staff really behind the scene put together this annual report to highlight some of the quantifiable and non-quantifiable benefits from our last year's work.
Thank you. So in 2017, we were able to quantify and recognize benefits from 7 previously issued audit reports. Management's implementation of our audit recommendations resulted in one-time and 5-year savings of approximately $81.4 million. For example, the Auditor General's 2014 review of TTC bus maintenance and warranty administration identified opportunities to maximize claims for eligible parts warranties under new bus warranties. In response to the audit recommendations, staff from multiple TTC departments worked together to develop and implement a new warranty claim process. The warranty claim rate increased from approximately 30% in 2012 to 80% as of April 2017. So translating this into dollars saved, this represents an additional $5.8 million in annual recurring warranty revenues. The 2015 audit of property tax assessments and payment in lieu of taxes identified opportunities to improve the management of property tax assessment review, appeal, and billing processes. The audit identified certain properties that were potentially undervalued and incorrectly assessed. Based on discussions with management from the Revenue Services Division of the appeals filed to date, we conservatively estimate $5.8 million in recurring annual property tax and payment in lieu of tax revenue. The Auditor General's 2016 cleaning services audit also identified properties that were receiving higher levels of cleaning. The audit also made recommendations to reduce contracted cleaning costs. Through ongoing efforts to implement the audit recommendations, management expects annual recurring savings of approximately $740,000. These savings are in addition to the $850,000 annual savings that were reported by management last year. Cost recoveries and loss prevention from investigations conducted by the forensic unit were also achieved in 2017. The office also issued several audit reports in 2017 where financial benefits were either not determinable at the time the audits were issued, or where financial benefits will be realized when management implements the audit recommendations. For example, the Auditor General's 3-part audit of the Municipal Licensing and Standards Division identified issues related to licensing, proactive inspections, and complaint management. The overarching theme in all 3 reports was the need for clear, specific, and enforceable bylaws. The audit of TTC's procurement policies and practices made recommendations to improve the management of inventory, the efficiency of purchasing activities, and controls for non-competitive purchases. TTC staff have only recently begun implementing the audit recommendations, but they have already earmarked approximately $2.2 million in the TTC's 2018 operating budget. These savings are not included in the Auditor General's current year savings estimate, but they will be verified and discussed with management in the Auditor General's next audit recommendation follow-up process. The Auditor General's audit of lease administration at Union Station found that potentially $9.4 million in rent and operating cost recoveries had not been finalized, recorded, and collected by city staff. This estimate, again, is also not included in our current year savings estimate and will be realized when the outstanding amount is finalized and settled. This audit also provided recommendations to improve oversight of commercial operations at the station in order to minimize costs and maximize net operating income distributions to the city. Finally, the Phase 2 audit of extended healthcare benefits identified issues related to provider fraud detection, overpayments, and unusual claims activity. I will now pass it back to the Auditor General for her concluding remarks.
Thank you. And in looking forward, we're going to continue to take a risk-based approach. We're going to continue to work in a synergistic but independent manner with management. Looking forward on a technical basis, we're going to increase our data analytics and maybe move and do a little work and explore artificial intelligence and the potential benefit of that to the city and to our audits. And I just wish to thank this committee and management and my staff for the work that they put in each and every year to bring our reports forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Ford, you had indicated a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and as always, a fantastic report by the Auditor General and her entire team. I do have just some, I guess, statistics that jumped out to me on page 8 of the presentation, or page 7 of the report. Is the over 5-year span of $203 million. We can see in its lowest point in 2015 on the savings of 17 million, and then jumping almost, through my calculations, almost 450% to 2017. So what have we done differently since then, or have you just been more active in investigations, or what's to explain the difference?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing is that we always use a risk-based approach, and we can't determine which projects are going to bring back the most savings, but we refreshed it just at that time. And so that created a whole new suite of projects. City Council has been supportive of the office and funded monies last year, and that actually assisted with us not only increasing up to 81 million in potential savings, but also in realized savings on this slide, but also potential savings that will come through. So they did do that investment, and they also have. It looks like they might. Looks like they're going to support us again this year, although it's not a guarantee, of course, until the budget's passed. So there's that investment for the return. I don't know what the past was because I wasn't here. I started actually around that time, but you can't really predict. Like, it's not a question of because I'm here, this is what's happened. Certainly when you do more projects, there are more savings, but also the other impacts are equally important, like IT security, for example, which would not show up in this slide. So in the end, more funding assisted. We refreshed our risk analysis, and I just think that the diligence of the staff and the nature of the projects that we undertook.
And one follow-up question, Mr. Chair. So moving forward to 2018, City Council has sent out the work plan that your team will be undertaking. What is the percentage, or how much time do you allocate towards the 2018 work plan and follow-ups and making sure the 2017 recommendations are being implemented?
So we have a team actually here of a senior and 3 staff members who do the follow-up on a recurring basis, and they also support other audits. So I would say probably about maybe 5% of the office works in follow-up, I would say, and that's equally an important role, but it doesn't work unless management does their work and they do their work. So they know we have a honed system where they can report to us, and we follow up just what needs to be followed up. So we've kind of, I think to be honest, I've presented to the Auditor Generals across Canada and on this exact issue, and our follow-up, our implementation percentage is probably one of the highest in the countries because of the work that management does, and our system is probably one of the better systems and they wanted to know more about how we did this. So we use a limited amount of staff, about 5%. Management does their work, and we have a honed system in order to be able to make sure that the recommendations are implemented in a cost-effective manner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Hart, you'd indicated a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, I'd like to follow up first on Councillor Ford's question on page 7, where he identified the savings of $81 million in 2017. When I go to page 9, and it lists off previous audit reports number 1 to 7, and it quantifies at the end of that $81 million, isn't the $81 million identified in the 2017 annual report reflective of work that the Auditor General's office has done between, looks like 2013 and 2016 predominantly? Is that correct?
Not really. We have in the back, it's a combination. So it depends on when the recommendation is implemented. So there are some for the last couple of years, like Union Station, property tax. That's the work that was done in the last 3 years, and there was, I think, a property tax is about 31 million, I think it is, over 5 years. So there's that, but there's also some that have been, a few that have been up to 2016. So we've separated it out in the back in the tables, and it identifies, I don't know if we've put the actual amounts for each one. Do you want to speak to that, Jim?
I see it on page 9.
Yeah. Council.
Yeah. Okay. It's just a separate question. I noticed last year that you contracted out, if you will, the fraud and waste hotline. Just wondering how that's working for you. I noticed the numbers are your numbers seem to be pretty consistent, I guess, for the last 10 years. Last year was, I think, 680, if I remember the number in the report, and average over 10 years is 660. So are you noticing more complaints coming in since you've contracted it out, or different kinds of complaints? And how would you know when it's successful or not successful? How do you measure that?
I would say I agree with you that it's stabilizing over time. That's the first observation. The second one is the change actually in having a call and answer service is to serve two purposes. One, it allows the quality of the complaint to be better because there can be questions around where did this happen, and it allows for that. And it also allows for people who couldn't leave a message in 30 seconds. The second thing is it allows me to redeploy key staff who are trained to actually work on major audits this year, major investigations this year, and that's what happened. So we contracted out only the call answer service and where it's transcribed, but my staff were redeployed to actually work on the major audits. We were able to do 5 of those this year, which was a big difference.
Okay. Another question, if you have time. On page 10 and page 12, I noticed 2 of the audits, one on facilities management and one on the TTC. Facilities management, a lot of the savings were from consolidating custodial contracts, I believe. And on the TTC, it was from using the city fuel contract. Did you find those findings surprising to you, given that, to me, on the face of them, they're pretty basic management practices?
I report what I find, and each of those audits came to the committee for full discussion. So I don't give an opinion on surprise or not surprise. I just report what I find, and then
I was surprised.
It's very neutral.
On page 18, just another quick question. You noticed, you mentioned $242,000 of savings, and that there's other savings from divisional management, and you also noted that that's tracked. Can you say how much the divisions have saved? It mentions it's tracked, but it doesn't give a number. I'm just wondering what that number is.
No, actually, I was going to speak to that in our fraud report, which is next. And I guess the short answer is, right now and historically, the office has prepared its report based on the work that has flowed through the office. But there are other areas around the city who have some lines like this, and divisions who do some work, and not everything comes through the hotline. What I'd like to bring next year, and it's a big change and a big ask, but I'm going to endeavor to do it, is actually a picture of the fraud management across the city from all of, from TTC through to TCH, through agencies and divisions, just so that we understand the entire framework across the city. So right now, it's limited to what comes through our office, but there's a broader picture that I think is important to understand how it's being managed across the city. So look forward to that report for next year.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Are there any members of the committee wishing to speak? Councillor Matlow, I have you first.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Auditor General and her team for the work that you do. And I've said this before, but when I was first elected, I was kind of thrown here under duress by the previous mayor, with all due respect to my colleague sitting next to me. And what I found is that this committee was both one of the most interesting and meaningful committees that I sit on at Council, given that whether you call it efficiencies or savings to invest in programs and other areas of import, or a gravy train, or whatever rhetoric you call it, this is the place to find it, to really be able to see how our government can work at its best of times, and also where it doesn't work well enough and where we can recommend advice on how to improve it. And so I just want to thank all of you for the important work you do, and you should feel very proud of the work that you do every day, because you make our government and our city better by what you do. That being said, I do want to express one area of disappointment. And I say this as productive criticism, or constructive criticism, I hope. We are often talking about finding $10 million of savings here, $5 million there, $20 million there, et cetera. That all adds up, and that is incredibly important to do. But you've heard about this before, and I'm going to repeat it. We are spending billions of dollars, or at least we've proposed to spend billions of dollars on one subway stop. Billions of tax dollars on one subway stop. We currently have an agreement with the provincial government that allows us to move forward with a 7-stop LRT that would not only cost us far less money, but in fact, the vast preponderance of that project would, under the agreement, be paid for through the provincial government, not our books. But even more importantly, with the same city money invested now, because we've also, to facilitate the one-stop subway, we've increased our debt load. We've increased property taxes. And for the same city money, we could actually invest in 24 stops for the same price, a network, along with that includes the 17-stop extension to U of T Scarborough. So we don't know a lot of things, but what we do know is that for the same envelope of funds, we could provide far more service, rapid transit service, to far more people, serving them well with every dollar that we have access to. That's what we do know. That's inarguable. What we also know, based on our own studies, is that it will actually take the average person in Scarborough longer to get to most places they want to go with only one stop versus so many more stops, because obviously they'd just be able to access those stops in a quicker period of time, by foot or by bus. So more people in Scarborough are going to be left on the bus now due to the decisions that we're making. The reason I remind us this is this. There was a request earlier last year for a value for money assessment, an audit done by this AG and you. And I read this, the mandate of the Auditor General. I'll just read it just to remind you, and I hope all of you have read this. The mandate of the Auditor General, this is from your presentation today. The Auditor General is responsible for assisting City Council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds. 2, the achievement of value for money in city operations. The quality of stewardship over public funds and the achievement of value for money in city operations. I submit to all of you and all of us that we've failed so far in doing those two things, we collectively. And I ask you respectfully, that the argument that I've heard that this is a done deal when council's already voted on it, so there's no reason to do a value for money audit at this point, doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The reality is, and we know, and if you read the Toronto Star this morning, you'll know even more, that the decision has not been made. That we are going to be getting a 30% design and updated cost estimate, well, maybe after the election, I hope beforehand, because the public has a right to know what the facts are and the decisions that we're making and why we're making them. But I also submit to you that before we decide to spend those dollars, council and the public need to know what the results of that comparison is so we can make the right decision, whatever the facts come back as. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others wishing to speak? I'll take a moment just to speak very briefly. Like Councillor Matlow, and I suspect the sentiments of the committee, I would like to thank the Auditor General, her management team, and especially the members of the broader audit team for all of the work that you do. It's been an interesting journey in this committee. A lot of work has gone into audit. And I don't know, maybe if you ask somebody on the street, what does an auditor do? They think maybe they dust off some books and go through some numbers and check things with a calculator. But we know as a committee that there's much more to it. There's field work, there's investigation, there's some very interesting things that I'm sure, Madam Auditor, you've asked your team members to do, all for the betterment of the public service. So yes, there were a lot of financial savings, and that's good. The auditors found ways to save money or to stretch that dollar even further. But I'll put to you, to everyone listening, that the work of the Auditor General's office is the fuse for transformation in the public service. And we have a better, stronger public service that people are more confident in, and we're constantly evolving because these audit recommendations come out in conjunction with management, and they give the management the power, the authority, the oomph to go out there and make changes in the business, to evolve it to a better business. And for that, I'm very grateful. I think the citizens of Toronto should be grateful, and just want to express my thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of my team, thank you.
Okay, with that, may I have a motion that City Council, to receive this report for information? Pardon me, the clerk, it is a motion to send it to City Council for it to be received for information. Councillor Matlow. So moved. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay. On to AU 11.2, the 2017 annual report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. We do have a speaker registered for this. May I request that Derek Moran join us at the front. Welcome again, Derek. You've got 5 minutes.
I just love how Councillor Matlow keeps ripping that scab off. That's why he should run for mayor. So in this item, it mentions Auditor General's report, Table 5, divisions and agencies and corporations with substantiated complaints. A few of them mentioned here are accounting services, real estate services, and revenue services, because who do property taxes go to ultimately? They go to revenue services. Now, I hate to do this because he is the councillor I get along with the best here at the City of Toronto, but for those of you who don't know, the Toronto Police Service have a financial crimes unit. The Financial Crimes Unit have their own account on Twitter. Guess what the Toronto Police Service's Financial Crimes Unit just tweeted about yesterday? They wrote, this is about cryptocurrencies, as Bitcoin bubble loses air, frauds and flaws rise to surface. Now, it's too bad he's not here, but what does this have to do with Councillor Lee? Well, did he not just second some sort of motion thingy introduced by Councillor Norm Kelly on recommends that, one, City Council requests Revenue Services Division staff in conjunction with Legal Services and IT Services to review the possibility of utilizing cryptocurrency as a form of payment for municipal property taxes, utilities, parking violations, and municipal land transfer taxes, as well as a payment system by the city, and report back to the Executive Committee in the second quarter of 2018. Well, why doesn't the City of Toronto concentrate on not defrauding the people of Toronto? Why doesn't the City of Toronto, instead of reviewing the possibility of utilizing coin bits and the chain block as a form of payment for municipal property taxes, why doesn't the City of Toronto focus on complying with the statutory rule already in place for them in the City of Toronto Act with Section 336, which, and they have a shorter version of this in the UK, which makes all this more easier to understand. take notice of Section 79.2 of the UK Local Government Act of 1888, which says, incorporation of county council, all duties and liabilities of the inhabitants of a county shall become and be duties and liabilities of the council of such county. Now, I've mentioned before, I think here at City Hall, that at the Code of Consultation, Fiona Murray pointed out to me that you guys all operate under civil law. Anyone here ever heard of something called usufruct? There's duties attached to that the Auditor General is to take notice of. Usufruct is a civil law term. It's defined as the right of enjoying a thing, the property of which is vested in another, and to draw from the same all the profit, utility, and advantage which it may produce, provided it be without altering the substance of the thing. Then there's the duties that come along with usufruct, which anyone can go online and look up for themselves in Bouvier's Law Dictionary 1856. This is a definition for a usufructuary. Domat, with his usual clearness, points out the duties of the usufructuary, which are, 1, to make an inventory of the things subject to the usufruct in the presence of those having an interest in them. 2, to give security of the person mentioned in Section 7 of the Constitution, for their restitution when the usufruct shall be at an end. 3, to take good care of the things subject to the usufruct. 5, to keep the thing in repair at his own expense. And 4, this is the best one, to pay all taxes and claims which arise while the thing is in his possession as a ground rent. So as I pointed out to Mayor Tory at Executive Committee recently, this that comes attached at the bottom of any bill from the City of Toronto, this is actually a rent check. This is from a rent check from you, the City of Toronto, and the Federal Crown. Because, you know, the Federal Crown, as I explained to Marco Menachino at his budget town hall meeting a couple weeks ago, just can't come over here from another country on the other side of the ocean and start selling off the land and natural resources that don't belong to them without providing security for restitution. And you know what, I brought this up with Marco at his budget town hall meeting, and what was so great about it was that he didn't dispute that this is a credit item. And the Code 96 here, if you go on the Canadian Payments Association's website, acknowledges that. And what he said was, why doesn't your father then just deposit this credit item into his account and then draw upon the funds from it, from this credit item, out of his account to pay the debt with? And well, we'll see how Max at the bank my father deals with goes with that, because you know how bankers act. They think that they own you.
Thank you for speaking to us. Are there any questions of the speaker? Enjoy your day. Thank you. From the committee members, are there any questions of staff on this item? Councillor Hart?
Follow up to the question I asked on the previous report. I noticed that in terms of the number of complaints, it's pretty flat year over year. You know, 660 is the average over 10 years. There were 2 years where there was a blip, and I recall what that blip was about. So I'm just wondering why you think it's almost the same every year, just under 2 complaints a day, year after year, on average. Why would that be?
I think it's simply, one is a maturing of the system. When it was first announced, there was probably an onslaught. We do find a fluctuation when reports come out, major reports come out. We see a fluctuation then. So I think that's what it is. But I think there's a piece missing here, as I outlined, and that is that this is what comes in passively, and I want to have a broader understanding of across the city, the strengths and the weaknesses in this area. So I think it's just a maturation.
Okay. Just wondering, in your opinion, in terms of resources, I note, and traditionally a lot of complaints end up getting referred off to divisions. In your opinion, do divisions and your office have enough resources to handle all the complaints? And do either you or divisions ever have to contract out complaints or send them outside the organization to get them resolved in a timely manner? Just wondering about that.
So that, thank you, and through you, Chair, it's always a balance. So the divisions, I think, work very diligently, and we try to refer to them those matters that are not as complex, and we also make sure there's an independence in the investigation. So there's some that we take because they're either higher profile, there's a lack of independence, potentially a lack of expertise. But the divisions are doing a great job. They sometimes refer out because we don't have the money to do it, so they've contracted out some of those. We've contracted out some of ours, but we also do a lot in-house. I think the challenge is you can never know what's going to come in. And when it comes in, you're always trying to juggle resources, so we may stand down on an audit project. So it's really a balance. But if something came in that was abnormal, that really did need a lot more resources, I would explain that to City Council, because it would be something that would be completely unexpected. So we manage within our budget, and we would ask for the relevant budget at that time. We manage within our budget right now. But it's a balancing act. If something came in, though, that was critical to the city, we would reach out either to the division to support with theirs or come back to council on that, just to make sure. I think the most important thing is that the confidence is there, that the level of work is going to be done to resolve any concern about a fraud.
On page 21, I notice under acceptable use policy, there's one there that kind of stands out to me. And it talks about an employee who received gifts and went on paid trips with the vendor. But then it says the employee had declared a conflict of interest in this regard. Did the employee declare a conflict of interest up front and then worked and managed the vendor's contract?
So, through you, Chair, in that case, what happened was that apparently they had declared a conflict of interest verbally to their boss, and the duties were moved around so that the employee was not directly overseeing the contract. But when we were doing our work, we found some other issues and highlighted those.
Yes.
So, but what's happened is they're tightening up to make sure that everything really does need to be documented, so it's very clear what the relationships are.
So just to be clear, did the employee receive gifts and go on paid trips with the vendor while managing that vendor's contract ever?
They didn't, well, they did, from the work that we've done, and from the independent investigation also conducted by somebody outside of that unit, in the city, but outside the unit, they did not. We did not find evidence of that.
Okay. On page 22, it talks about falsifying dependent information, and it says the employee was terminated for a $19,500 fraud. Was that matter referred to Toronto Police?
Let me just see. I'll have to have a look at that item.
Maybe you can just tell me offline.
Yeah, I
Just
will.
Two questions. Was it referred to police, and has the employee been directed to pay back the money would be two obvious kind of questions.
So management may be here to speak to that, and I'll pull out our file on that. I
don't
just
need
can't
to know
remember
what
that
division
detail.
it is.
But what I can say is that I have to say, for the City of Toronto, management takes the action that I feel is necessary. And if it wasn't, if no action was taken in a matter that I thought action should be taken, we make sure we follow up with management. But I can say that they are diligent in that aspect from the files that I've been involved with since I've been here.
Right. I guess just my experience with a $19,000 fraud, it would automatically be referred to
Yeah.
police and
It would be.
automatically.
Through the chair, we are requiring the employee or the ex-employee to pay the money back.
I'm informed that there's a presentation on this, and regrettably, we slightly went out of sequence. So, Councillor Hart, if there's any questions pursuant to the presentation, if you could flag it to my attention, I don't want to.
Aren't any.
You haven't seen it yet. So if I could turn it over to the Auditor General and your staff to make that presentation. We'll pick up the questions just after that if there are any. Thank you.
So with us today, we have Elaine Au and Sean McIntosh, both seniors in the Fraud and Waste Hotline unit, and both have been involved with major investigations this year. And they prepared this report, and they will be working, providing the presentation. At a high level, though, I can say that the hotline is stabilizing as far as the number of allegations coming in, that management is diligent and works synergistically with our organization, and they do a lot of first-line work, which saves us some resources, and we plan to not expand the hotline, but certainly just have a broader picture across all agencies. So I'm turning it over to Elaine so she can walk through any questions, walk through the presentation.
Thank you and good morning. Today's presentation on the 2017 annual report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline will cover 3 items: the key statistics, by the numbers and beyond the numbers, and other major accomplishments. This year, to summarize the key statistics, we have created a new visual infographic. 2017 was a very busy year for our office. We processed 680 complaints, representing over 1,000 allegations. This is a 23% increase over the number of complaints received in 2016. However, this does not necessarily mean that there's more fraud at the city. Complaint activity may go up or down because of the dynamic nature of the hotline and as a result of various factors, including outreach activities and the nature of issues reported by the media. In terms of dispositions, or what we do with the complaints, there are some complaints that are closed right away after we conduct preliminary inquiries, and there are some complaints that are referred to management to do the first-line investigation with oversight from our office. We remain independent in these investigations and ensure complaints are appropriately addressed by management. Then there are other complaints that require our expertise, such as the Toronto Parking Authority or the conditional building permits investigation. So determining dispositions is like the process of peeling back the layers of an onion, which you may have heard the Auditor General reference before. Some complaints may only need a first-line investigation, which peels back the first layer, and then there are other complaints that need a deeper dive to keep peeling back the layers to get to the bottom of things. In the next few slides, we'll take a closer look at the numbers. All 680 complaints received in 2017 were reviewed by our office. We conducted preliminary investigative work on 89% of these complaints. This helps us to determine whether allegations have merit for further investigation. In terms of outcomes, 12% of complaints that were investigated or referred to divisions were substantiated as at December 31st, 2017. This percentage will increase as 2017 complaints continue to be concluded in 2018. It is important to note that 38% of the substantiated complaints were anonymous. This shows that even if a complainant wishes to remain anonymous, allegations can still be investigated and substantiated. This slide shows the total losses and recoveries for the last 5 years, as well as actual losses for 2017. However, there are other impacts of the Hotline program beyond the numbers, including the detection and prevention of fraud, which we will go over on the next slide. One of the impacts beyond the numbers is discipline. Discipline acts as a deterrent to wrongdoing, and in 2017, 2 employees had their employment terminated, 5 employees received other discipline such as suspensions or warning letters, and there were 22 cases of other appropriate action taken by management, including reinforcing workplace expectations through training. This shows that when hotline complaints are received, the city takes action. Another impact is information gathering. Collecting data on complaints is important for several reasons. First, it can help to identify trends in data that may point to systemic issues. In 2017, key trends of substantiated complaints included benefits and subsidy fraud, conflict of interest, second jobs, and misuse of city resources. Secondly, complaint data is also one of the factors considered that may result in an audit being conducted. For example, the long-term disability and employee extended health benefits audits from 2015 and 2016 were initiated in part due to complaint data from the hotline. Finally, gathering information also helps us to identify areas that may require proactive monitoring. Other benefits of the hotline include strengthening internal controls and improving operational efficiencies. In terms of other accomplishments, in 2017, we've changed our operations internally. As previously mentioned, we have implemented a 24/7 independent and confidential call answer service that has allowed us to streamline. We've also been selective on what we investigate. Previously, we used to ask divisions to report back on management issues, but we are now focusing our attention on allegations of fraud and wrongdoing, and this has allowed us to conduct more investigations this year. In 2017, we did 5 major investigations, each with a separate report to Audit Committee. These reports contain a total of 37 recommendations for management action, including recommendations to strengthen internal controls and help identify potential savings. This year, our office will continue to focus on major investigations. In closing, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank management and staff. The symbiotic relationship between our office and management is an important part of the impact and success of the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Management puts in a great effort and takes action to ensure that the right things are done. Only by employees reporting wrongdoing and with management support does the hotline succeed. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? Councillor Carmichael-Greb?
Thank you. How do you advertise the hotline?
Through you, Chair. We conduct several communication initiatives throughout the year, including employee Monday morning news items to advertise when our annual report is being published. I think there were a couple where we announced the 24/7 independent call answer service as well. And there's a whole section on the public service bylaw and also on our website that advertises the Fraud and Waste Hotline. And I'm not sure if the Auditor General has anything to add.
Yeah, and this year, we plan to communicate with the councillors and allow, we have business cards, so if somebody has a referral, they can simply use that, because often somebody will come to their councillor. So having a business card to provide to them with the contact information and what we do will be helpful, I think, to both the councillors, who sometimes are the first line, and then come to our office. So that is, we've got them prepared, we just need to distribute them.
Have you considered doing a more broad sort of public awareness campaign in the city, other than just the cards, either, I don't know, social media, bus, that kind of thing, just?
Internal or external to the city proper, the city management? External, you mean outside for the public?
Yeah.
We haven't, but that might be something we can think about. Certainly within the city, because of the disclosure of wrongdoing framework, supervisors are required to report to our office when they receive allegations of wrongdoing, or and also directors. There's different responsibilities there, and we're going to refresh with city supervisors and directors their responsibilities within that regard. And the reason it's important is because we want to make sure the right level of independence is there when work is done, and also to bring a picture to this committee and city council of where we are on that continuum of, how we're doing on fraud and waste. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow, you had some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, follow up actually on Councillor Carmichael-Greb's question with regard to the how we advertise the hotline, or raise awareness about the hotline. I've never seen, and tell me if I've missed something, but I haven't seen anything that expressly indicates whistleblower protection and the protection of anonymity. And I just wonder, as much as we may raise awareness about the hotline, if from your experience, if people don't feel confident that they're going to be protected, or that they won't be undermined in some way, that they may not come forward. So what are you doing to ensure that people are aware of that specific protection? And if not, do you have plans to ensure that that's part of the awareness campaign?
So through you, Chair, the protection, the retaliation, the protection in relation to retaliation is included in the disclosure of wrongdoing framework. So employees are protected and their anonymity is protected when they do come to us. But you are correct, perhaps a reminder of that and a refresh of that is going to help staff to feel a level of comfort. I can say this year we've undertaken a few, less than 5, investigations related to some people claiming that there was retaliation, but we did find that there was not. But so it is out there that they know they're protected. I think we can do a better job there for sure with refreshing that. So as we refresh and remind supervisors about the hotline and their obligations to come to us will equally refresh the protections that are in place for people who.
I appreciate that. I just hadn't seen sort of that expressly indicated, and that may, and again, use your judgment, I'm just offering sort of my, just a
Yes,
intuitive reflection,
right.
but it may be helpful to let people know that they have that, so that they have the comfort to move forward.
Yes, and council was supportive of those protections
Yeah.
in the bylaw, but yet it might not translate on the ground, and
Thank
but
you.
I'll make sure that, but, so I appreciate you raising that for sure.
Thank you for hearing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions? I had a couple. I just wanted to follow on that train of thought because I found it very intriguing about how it's advertised. Do we have any sense why people complain? And I use the word complain as in identify an issue. Is there any even empirical information? Do people do it out of sense of duty? Is it out of spite for an individual? Is it all of the above? Is it because they find some savings? Is there any comment that anyone can offer in their dealings with people, if there's a trend, or is it all over the map?
Through you, Chair, it's a myriad of reasons. You know, it's like an elephant, and some people may see one aspect of the elephant but not understand the entire picture. Sometimes when, you know, you can be in a situation where there may be things being done by an employee that maybe bothers somebody, and it might be some of that where there might be I guess, a bias towards somebody. That's why it's important to have somebody who's independent to look at this and to really diagnose what's happening. So we see it from all sides, all different reasons. For the most part, actually, in almost all cases, people come, they may not have the full picture, but they come with bona fides. They do come with a valid question that needs to be looked at for waste or fraud. Because it's not happening doesn't mean that it's not working. It creates trust. What they need to know is that 100% of the time, we look at every single allegation that comes into our office, and we analyze every single one, and we do preliminary work on 86%, 89%, and the ones we don't do work on really are areas that might be a wrong call. You know, they might need another officer. So we really do that. They need to be confident that we'll look at it. But the outcome, we don't report back. So they come for a myriad of reasons. They have one piece of the puzzle, and we look at the entire puzzle.
I think it's 38% of people was mentioned that choose to remain anonymous. I guess one would think that if somebody didn't remain anonymous, it might be a bit stronger of a process because there could be a dialogue between the Auditor General's office and that. But I also appreciate the fact and the concerns of people about choosing that path, and would invite them to continue to submit their complaints, because even having a one-sided complaint is better than nothing at all. But I wondered if I'm not going to say direction or whatever, but if we do begin to advertise more about people's rights and whistleblower protections, if there's a change in that 38%, I wonder if that's something that we can acknowledge in the future going forward. If that number begins to drop because we are making people feel more comfortable about the protections that the process offers. I'll ask sort of one last question, and it's something that gave me joy to read in the report, is that there's quite a split between the disposition of the complaints. It's not 90% sort of go nowhere. It's a very healthy, you know, I think it was 1/3 goes to management, because that's probably the right thing to do. There's a specific issue that can be addressed through management. Another third, you know, sort of go for deeper investigation and are determined. But with the resources that you have, do you still feel that you can meet that 100% mark? And will you come to us if there's ever a situation where you're beginning to compromise the ability to make sure that you go through everything that you get through the line? I think that's a real important brand that people should feel assured of, that their complaint is taken very, very seriously and is looked at diligently. And if we have to diverge from a path where you've just got too much and not enough resources, I think we should know about that as a committee. And do you have the mechanisms in place to let us know about that?
Thank you. And Chair, to answer your question, 100% of the time we will look at every single complaint. 100% of the time, all the time, because you never know what's in behind that complaint. So that's important. And that'll be done by our staff because we have a honed triage process. Right now, we're moving around resources to be able to put the right level on the complaint. Should it come where there's something that puts the city at risk and we don't have the resources to deal with it, and we're not able to work with the city to work in that investigation, I will come back to this committee, I will come back to council because of the risks that it presents to the city. But we're working within the money that we have, and I don't have that situation right now. Certainly there's files going on that I'm waiting to see the outcome of, but if it comes to that, we will come back. But we're working within the budget we have, and I think it's a reasonable budget.
Thank you. Just having some technical difficulties with the clock, so I'm doing my best here. Sorry for the beeping. If there's members of council that wish to speak, Councillor Matlow, I think you had indicated. Councillor Hart, I've got you next. Thank you.
I was just recalling a conversation that I had with my dad when I was a kid about advice that he gave to me. It may sound odd, but he once said, I think it's really important that if you see somebody being mugged in an alley, you don't just walk by. You have to protect them. And we ended up having, I thought, a very thoughtful conversation about all the different elements of what that entails. I think all of us know, yes, it's the right thing to do, but you've got to consider something. What if you go in there and you get stabbed yourself? What if they remember you and then they want to further victimize you afterwards and then maybe they follow you home? Is it worth it? Is it worth the risk? Are you scared to go into that alley? Is it the right thing to do? I'm still convinced that you've got to go in and do what you have to do. But you do have to consider all those other issues. And I would imagine that before somebody is considering calling us up or calling the fraud and waste hotline, they're considering that as well. It's analogous. What will happen to my career? I work in an environment that you often are rewarded for not ruffling feathers and rocking the ship, but that, the more you sort of look like everything's fine, you keep getting promoted. What if I speak up? What will happen to me? What will people think of me? Will they trust me in the future? Will that person be upset at me? They've got to consider all this. And it's scary, I imagine, for that person to be able to speak up. And that's the reason that I asked my question earlier in a follow-up to Councillor Carmichael Greb's questions about what assurances do we give proactively to people who work for the City of Toronto that not only will we protect you, but in fact we encourage you and we applaud you for speaking up and showing that courage, because we are cognizant of the risks that you're taking. You see this in many areas, whether, people in neighborhoods who don't speak up because they see a crime and they're concerned about what's going to happen. You see it in various different contexts. So my point of this is simply that we need to get the word out. We need to let people know throughout our system. But as the AG, I believe, is actively listening and will act on, is that I think we need to really assure them that we encourage and will protect them and applaud them for doing so. They're showing a lot of courage and a lot of guts for speaking up.
Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. I think the fraud and waste hotline works really well because staff are communicated with by management that there is whistleblower protection. They understand that. Still are 38% of people that call in anonymously, so they have some concerns. But the beauty of the hotline is that those 38% of calls are listened to. So staff do know that they can call in and there will be action. You ask yourself the question, why do people call? And I think like any organization, 90% of the employees in the City of Toronto come to work every day to do the best job they possibly can. And when they see somebody that isn't, or worse, is stealing from the organization or stealing time, money, benefits, you name it, it offends them. And they're deeply offended, and they tell their management team or they tell the Fraud and Waste Hotline. That's why most people come forward, because they work for a fantastic organization, and it really upsets them when people are stealing from their employer. That's why they come forward. We've got a very fair process at the end of the day. I have some concerns when I read the report and I see outcomes around whether police are called or whether they're not called or whether people are terminated or whether it's silent on discipline. You know, from the HR division's perspective, they have a lot of input in that, but ultimately it comes down to divisional management and ultimately the city manager to decide and make sure things are fair and equitable. I can tell you from experience, they aren't always, but that's a lens that city staff have to take a look at these reports. But the work that the Fraud and Waste Hotline does since its inception makes the 90% of employees in this organization feel a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, may I have a motion that City Council receive this report for information? Councillor Carmichael Greb. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 11.3, IT Infrastructure and IT Asset Management Review, Phase 1, establishing an information technology roadmap to guide the way forward for infrastructure and asset management. Councillor Hart, you had held this down. Do you have any questions of staff?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. The substance of the report seems to harken back to a number of reports I've read over the years, going back to 2006, and then some of the recommendations here are coming back to the Audit Committee once again. What's your opinion in terms of why these recommendations need to be reiterated and why they're not moving forward perhaps the way some of them should?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I can say that a theme that I have seen at the city, I think goes back to, I mean, amalgamation is a long time ago, but still different groups coming together, the division of the work, and changes in staff. I know that our current CIO came in, I think, late 2013. And when I came on the scene, I didn't expect to see, one of these areas, I didn't expect to see what I saw, which was, again, challenges understanding the infrastructure, the assets that we have, an inventory of assets. So I didn't expect to find that. But when I look back at other divisions and I see that this is a struggle where we almost have to take a fresh look, I see that that's probably one of the reasons. It's essentially, let me describe at a high level what we see here. We have a team that is really looking forward, looking forward, modernizing city, e-strategy, all of that is good news. And underneath that, there's like the meat in the sandwich is to deliver, there has to be an infrastructure strategic plan, a roadmap to deliver. And that piece was weak. Because even understanding the assets we have and moving to where we need to is a problem. So the IT team has now hired Lawrence Ida, and they're agreed with where I am with these recommendations, and they're going to use this to move forward. So, long story short, there's history here of divisions doing, having strength on the CIO, and there's been a history of not one person being accountable for the IT across the city. We found that in the security side, and that created issues. We're seeing the same thing on the infrastructure side. So where the city's going at a high level in the IT is fantastic. This is a complementary piece at a time, this is why we report it now, it's a timely time to fold this in as the city moves forward and get it right once and for all in this area.
Very brief follow-up question. You mentioned in the report that there's a bit of a culture shift perhaps needed, and that decentralization in some cases really should be centralized. Some of the decentralization that exists today, are those divisions convinced that centralization actually will deliver better service for them? Has it been demonstrated to them? And those areas that have been centralized, have you seen more effective service delivery so that divisions actually are getting better service than managing the IT infrastructure themselves?
So let me clarify. Our approach and recommendation relates to somebody centrally understanding what is out there and how things are structured around IT assets, and really take an analysis, undertake an analysis to say what exactly has to be decentralized and what has to be centralized. So there's work to do here to really get the map of what they need to deliver going forward. When the city amalgamated, it was set up in a certain way to deliver. The city has matured, and now we need to do catch-up to, for the IT team to work with the decentralized groups, other agencies, to understand what it needs to deliver on an infrastructure basis. So what we see is, for example, really having a map of all the IT assets across the city, who's responsible for that. And I really think that on the security side, we saw there wasn't one person who wasn't really living out that responsibility and having the accountability and the control. And on the infrastructure side, we're seeing the same thing. But the CIO and the Director of Infrastructure is also here, so they can comment on that.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, just further to that question, Councillor, when the topic of centralization comes up, sometimes we default to thinking organizational. But what the Auditor General Beverly is referring to is we're talking about centralization. We're talking about people, process, and technology. What we've seen from a technology perspective is there's no longer independent technology. Everything we do today is connected some way, some shape, some form, whether it's from your smartphone to enterprise applications to underpinning infrastructure. We, as stewards of that technology, need to make sure that it's secure and available, and so things are a lot more related. So we need to look at it from a technology footprint. We need to look at it from a process perspective, and that means governance. Again, centralization doesn't necessarily mean reorganization. What is the governance? Who are the people? What are the types of decisions that need to be made that we're protecting and securing those critical assets? As an organization that's becoming more digital, our dependency on data and technology increases. So we need to make sure that we have the right governance. And then thirdly, if it results in some changes in roles and what people do, we have a look at that. So we're undertaking a series of things to look at that from a methodical and holistic manner, including current and past audit reports, but also doing things like a financial benchmark, so to make sure that we're getting the return on the value of those investments and correlating that to the service delivery. So that's really what we're looking at when we talk about centralized IT.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the committee? I see none, then I have a couple. And I think it's to the auditor, at least at the start here. I wonder, Auditor, could you comment, the situation and the description of our IT asset distribution, governance, infrastructure, is that unusual for an organization as it moves through, something this large, as it moves through time?
Chair?
Maybe I'll give you the
Answer your
second
question?
half, and what does that speak to the maturation of an organization?
Yeah,
Is that natural?
well, I'd actually also like the CIO to comment, but I can say that the City of Toronto not only is being the size of probably the 6th largest province, so it's very big, it's very diverse. But in addition to that, it's had some growing pains. So to answer your question, I was surprised at one level, but at another level, looking at the history, I just think the focus is to go forward and to catch up, because I think it's a result of the history. And I say that because I've seen it in other areas of the city. So I think it's those things, but I'll turn over to the CIO also.
Thank you again to the chair. Different organizations have different models and how they've put things together. As Beverly has indicated, the evolution of the City of Toronto, it's a good crossroads for us to be having a look at what is best for us, what is best to enhance and make our services effective and efficient. So really, I think it's a great time in terms of really getting the answer to that question, so that we, through evidence-based results in terms of tracking our assets, maximizing those assets, translating those assets to tangible service delivery, we can have the confidence and the associated metrics and KPIs to be able to explicitly answer that question.
Thank you. Again, to the auditor, in relation to your findings in your investigation, in your review of the structure, where did you find the risk? We were talking about, sorry, I didn't get this right. We're talking about centralization versus decentralization, and I take it what you found was that there are some technologies and assets that are within the control of city divisions rather than a more centralized model. And we have come about because of our story to be in that particular structure, and you're suggesting that that be looked at further and planned more. But in terms of risk over those assets, where does the risk lay? Does that lay with the CIOs? You know, if something happens, I'd go to the CIO, or is it now more maybe with the line manager that is looking after that piece of technology?
Chair, the risk lies with the CIO because he's the first person that you call when something goes wrong. But the challenge is, when he's come in at 2013, having a finger on the pulse of everything and where everything is, it's all the assets. That is not there. The assets that are connected to the system, which ones are decommissioned, the inventory. He's struggling. I would say it's not in place yet, but I think this report makes it very clear the accountabilities have to be there, just like security, so that he can deliver on his mandate.
So would you say that there's at least a disconnect right now? So if, you know, if we as council and the management team looks to the CIO for the integrity and the availability of the information and the information systems, yet the power and control and the responsibility of day-to-day looking after it might be in other places because of evolution of the organization.
It's a challenge, but I'll turn it to the CIO.
Again, through the chair and both of you, thank you for the comments. Almost an awkward question to answer, right? But yes, I mean, is there opportunity for, again, for an organization that is increasingly dependent on technology and data, for us to have better governance structures so that we can protect those assets? I think there is an opportunity for that in terms of just making sure we're managing to the best of our ability. So the accountability and the responsibility alignment is a good time for that dialogue.
Okay. And last question, again, back to the auditor, because you were investigating this from the outside, looking inwards. Did you find that the managers and the people that controlled the assets out in the divisions were appropriately certified or experienced? And also, did they balance their time with managing these assets versus their, you know, the core mandate of the division? And maybe what I'm saying is there maybe a better model where if there is a centralized service, that centralized approach puts 100% of their effort into managing information and information assets and frees up the divisions to do the work that they need to do?
So this is phase one of our work. That's the first thing. But to answer your question, what we've recommended here is actually that the CIO and his team take it away and identify which services absolutely need to be centralized and which ones where the delivery can take place in the division. At least even having an inventory of the assets is important. There's a difference between the mind controlling the organization and setting the standards and understanding where all the assets are and deploying fixes and patches in a seamless manner, and then the mind controlling it and then who delivers it. And I think that's a big thing that has to yet to be unpacked. And we know there's an issue here because the IT group has not been able to move forward on that front from a couple of audit reports. There's an issue here, but it's going to take some time for the new IT infrastructure lead and the CIO to unpack that and come back with a recommendation on how it has to be structured so that they can deliver on their full accountabilities.
Sure. Again, through the chair, fully agree, and without repeating any of the comments, you know, this audit, we've had an opportunity to comment and review in right down to the micro detail, level detail, and fully support the recommendations in terms of this is what's best for the city at this juncture.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none. Is there anyone to speak? Seeing none, I will take the opportunity then. If I may ask the clerk, I have a motion. And that is simply that it would be added on to the 15 recommendations that City Council, I guess this would be number 16, City Council requests the CIO to consider developing a service offering for city agencies where the case exists for cost savings or other benefits. And I'll speak very briefly to that. I hope the committee will support that. The recommendations are highly introspective, and I think about some work I did before taking on a role as a councillor being elected in this area. And it always equated IT infrastructure and IT services as that being very parallel but different than building assets. And if you recall, we've gone through a massive real estate transformation as seen through some of the resolutions at City Council to create a new agency where we're looking at how we think about these assets out in the field and how we sort of bring one mind into how we look at the strategy on those assets. And I see what we're doing here is exactly the same thing. One of the areas that wasn't deeply discussed in the report is our connectivity with our agencies. And I'm not saying that we have to go and extend the IT network to all of the agencies, but I understand that we are very much in the early days of those discussions looking for opportunities. So really, this gives the CIO an opportunity to think about how we could extend IT infrastructure into those agencies as an offering. And if it suits their business model, if it makes sense to them, maybe they can join this IT system as a service provider and be a little bit stronger. You know, I think about the importance of information. And it's just like buildings. If we ever have a break in telecommunications or communications at the city, or if we've ever compromised the integrity of our data, we've got an emergency and you know, of epic proportions, because maybe we can't deliver the services that we're supposed to deliver. And at minimum, we've definitely got an impact to public confidence on this government. So I think that this movement towards a strategy is very timely and very important. And I hope that everyone supports this going forward. With that, absolutely.
With respect to a service offering, did you have anything specific in mind, or are you just asking them to sort of blue sky and come up with something?
Yeah, I think the idea is to begin to develop a service catalog, and that could be started with the most basic and benign of things, such as offering an extension of our telephone service in there to join that larger network. And it could be something as sophisticated as the creation and support of maybe an application or a server.
So the intent of this motion is really about offering incentives to be able to buy into our IT rather than having standalones throughout the agencies? Is that a...
Correct. And I think it involves some steps of the IT organization to begin to think about what it is they could offer larger outside of the firewall of the full-out Toronto Public Service right now. And it might be the most basic of things, but if you don't ask the question and suggest we think about creating those service offerings, I'm not sure we'll have that spark started. And we'll see where it goes. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis, and of course it has to make sense.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Hart.
Just a quick question of clarification. That has the potential to be an enormous piece of work. The CIO, what is he to do with this once he considers it? Does he report back somewhere or consult with the agencies and the city manager? What's the next step after?
I think it has to be integrated into the strategy that the report talks to developing. And again, this is not something that's going to happen overnight, and I would really urge the CIO to start small on this stuff. And as the organization matures to a point that it can support something larger, then it will only make sense at that point in time. But I think it's important that council makes the statement that we're comfortable with that direction, moving outside of that firewall.
6 months of home internet for free, and the subscription is serious digital. So, Rogers always does this to me. So.
Understood. Okay. If there's any other questions, I guess the amendment is on the screen. Are all those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That carries. And then on the item as amended, All of those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. With that, I think we have completed our agenda. Thank you all. And have yourself a great day. Meeting adjourned.